Hello and welcome to Ildefonso Inc. Today on the channel, we are talking with Michael Spicer about the essential tools of game audio design. So Michael Spicer is an audio designer with experience crafting sound for video games, film, and podcasts. So we're going to dive into DAWs, digital audio workstations, understanding the basics of audio middleware like fmod and wWise, and identifying the key roles of sound design and music in the games industry. So if you're a music producer trying to break into games, or a composer trying to get into a game jam, or a sound and audio designer trying to get more familiar with the different types of software used in the games media, then this interview should hopefully clear up some of those concepts for you. And I've learned a lot talking to Michael in the past, so I'm really excited to be able to talk with him properly here on the channel about these many burning questions I have for him. So thank you guys so much for checking out the channel, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Hello and welcome. We have Michael Spicer today. Michael, how are you doing? I'm so glad we get to finally chat. We've been talking on LinkedIn for now probably like a month and a half.
That sounds right.
It's got to be right.
Yeah.
It's so crazy how that happened. So we're finally on the podcast talking about the essential tools of game audio design. And so thank you, one, for giving your time. We did a pre-call to kind of figure out what would be the most fun topics to dive into. So for what we have today is diving into DAWs. So I really wanted to know, why do composers use Reaper? And so let's start there first. Do you use Reaper? Is it your preferred tool? And give us the scoop on Reaper.
Sure. Okay. So I'm coming from the world of Logic, so the program, not the concept. Logic Pro X. I started on GarageBand back when I was just like recording myself playing music and stuff, and then because that program's so similar to Logic, it was an easy transition into that. So like the majority of the work I've done, even like the past year or so, has been in Logic, but like just recently I'm deeper into Reaper, just because especially for game audio, like everybody in game audio seems to prefer Reaper, and the reason being is how customizable it is. Specifically for sound design stuff, like there's a plugin called NVK Tools that you can use that kind of opens up the possibility of automating a lot of sound design processes, where say you have like a fire spell or something that you're doing, these tools, these plugins will you'll say like, hey, give me a starting point for like 50 different sounds based on these prerequisites, and you're like basically kind of programming. It's a little bit of a programming element in that, on that side of things, where you are telling it, I need like 5 layers, I need there to be a sizzle, I need there to be a whoosh, I need there to be this, that, whatever. And then it will draw from your library that you already have based on those prerequisites and give you like a bunch of sounds. And they still have to be like massaged and like produced and refined and stuff, but it's an amazing tool that like gives you a lot of like a really good starting point to make a lot of sounds fairly quickly, you know. And besides that, it's just like the layout is customizable. It's like there's kind of no ceiling on capability, you know. So it's over like the past like 5 years or so, like I've seen Reaper go from like an alternate DAW to use to like a lot of people are like it's in like job descriptions and stuff now, especially, you know, in like indie game dev, and I mean even some major companies, even here in Vegas, use it fairly regularly. So Yeah, I think that hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, so if you're building a portfolio as a composer, an audio designer, is Reaper number one tool that you recommend a composer start with, or Pro Tools or Logic? How would you say, if someone was like, okay, I need to pick one to start with, where would you point them?
I would definitely point to Reaper just because, yeah, that's like I'm saying, it's so customizable, and the price point is a lot better than most DAWs like Pro Tools. I don't know if it's the same license. I think it was like $600 a year or something like that, which is fine, like for if you're a Hollywood studio. But those are, and obviously Pro Tools it's a professional program, like it's been around forever. It's good, but Reaper, as far as capabilities and what you can do with it, I think it's like $60 as a starter, and I think that you can even do the demo version for as long as you want. You just have to do that, like there's like a pop-up that's like counts down, if you don't want to wait 20 seconds, then pay $60, but yeah, as far as a starting point, I think Reaper would be the one I would choose, knowing what I do now.
Yeah, and then what about audio middleware? Because again, like you mentioned, for your own portfolio, you started with Logic. I see a lot of songwriters and producers starting with Logic as well. For that producer or songwriter or composer who's working on their first game jam, or working with a solo dev on their first, I guess maybe their first music audio, because I don't even want to say soundtrack, because you're not really making a soundtrack at first. Like you're currently at the stage where you're making a soundtrack, it sounds like, where you're taking the files and turning it into an OST. But what is the job start as? If you're composing music, what is the role that they're asking you to do? What is the function? Are they asking you to create MIDI themes that can be utilized in different scenarios? Are they asking you for wave exports? They want to listen to, what is the first delivery product that you're responsible for?
It really depends on what we're talking. If we're talking about a jam versus like a company, like there's lots of different scenarios. Would you say like as far as just a starting project, like with some other kind of
let's say it's like let's say it's a solo dev who's like, hey, I need music. And what does your brain go to as like, okay, how do I organize this? How do I structure this? How do I deliver quote unquote music?
Yes, sure. So I guess a good way of getting into that is like, how does it differ from just producing an album? Like,
right.
So like in traditional music production, you have, you have the different phases. You have composing it, you have orchestrating it, you have mixing, mastering, publishing, distribution, all that stuff. The thing that's different about game audio is that it's non-linear, meaning that it's not going to sound. You play an album front to back, it's going to sound the exact same every time. Obviously, right? They're rendered out. There's a beginning and an end. With game audio, because you're creating audio for an environment where the player can experience an infinite number of things in that game. Like they'll do weird stuff that no one expected. Like, and the more people that play it, like just the more possibilities there are. So creating audio that reacts to the player, it requires your audio to be a little more malleable. Well, I should say like this, like you need music and sound. I'll just kind of lump it all together. Sound effects and music. You have to have, there's different considerations with that when it comes to getting it in the game. It's like understanding how often the player will hear something, how like if there's any unintended dissonances with like a sound effect and the music that's playing at any given time, which is like, again, that's just splits off in an infinite number of things. but mostly it's like listener fatigue is a big thing, and like having music that loops is another kind of prerequisite to that. To knowing that kind of thing will help you a lot, because yeah, I mean, like it's the player might have any number of hours on a certain game, and it's like you having enough, just even having enough music is another consideration, let alone like having enough variety within that enough, you know. But so an indie developer approaches me and says, I need music and sounds for my game. So I would first clarify, am I going to be like, what game engine are you using, and what like are you thinking about using middleware, and if not, would you, kind of thing. And it's like, it's a lot of game jams that I've worked on in the past. Like I'm not really a programmer, but using middleware is something that helps me kind of like create the behavior of the audio within a program that kind of makes sense more to my music brain, compared to like, you know, understanding like coding, like these footsteps will, you know, fire in an array of 10 randomly every time you hear, you know, stuff like that you can do within fmod and create all the behaviors of the sounds without like knowing a lot of scripting, you know. So I don't know if that I'm rambling.
No,
I'm like opening different doors in a hallway trying to find the answer for you, but
that's exactly where I wanted to go to, because I was hoping we would end up on middleware like fmod and wWise. And what is the dream engine for you if you meet that solo dev? They're making the next Stardew Valley. What are you hoping the engine is from your workflow perspective that plays nicely with fmod and wWise?
I think, well, as far as like what engine they'll use that'll interface with the middleware, or
like what's the preferred? I mean, maybe this depends on the work experience so far, but do you prefer to work in Unity or Unreal or any other specific that plays nicer with your preferred kind of, or does each come with their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's really like,
well, I'll say that most of them are like Unreal and Unity are like the main like non-proprietary, like not free to use, but well, I guess it's free to use until you like start publishing stuff, but those are the main kind of, that's the Apple and PC split kind of thing. But like each of them interfaces pretty well with both fmod and wWise. So like, you know, and always updating stuff and lots of stuff. I have more experience in Unity. Like the other thing too is like these programs have like extensive free tutorial stuff that you can look up. And do like, there's a whole wWise, very famous like wWise certification course you can take, which I did. I didn't do like the end exam thing because that's where they charge you, but you know, yeah, a lot of, as far as the actual engine and stuff, there's really no one that works better with anything else. It's more just like what I've been using. Now I will say the difference would be like, a lot of, at least up until now, a lot of AAA game companies have used wWise, just because I believe wWise was around longer, and it's an incredibly like powerful program. fmod is sort of more on the indie game side of things, although, you know, there's lots of examples of, you know, that'll prove me wrong, but you know, and generally, like if you're looking to contract and freelance with, you know, several different companies over time, then, you know, fmod might be the one you would go with, whereas wWise is more, that's like your in-house studio AAA kind of thing. So if that's the type of job you're gunning for, and that's at least what I've been kind of told over the years too. But yeah, and my personal opinion, I like fmod better just because of the layout. It looks more like a DAW, you know. And which just makes sense to my brain, whereas wWise is really more just like hierarchies, opening files, and then there's this, and it branches off to this, and all that stuff. Yeah, they more or less do the same thing, and they interface with most of the game engines like about the same, I would say. So,
okay, so that's really helpful to know that there's a wWise certification that will walk you through. And you said fmod. You said both of them kind of have built-in tutorials.
Yeah,
geared
and I mean,
towards
they're the way you'll really learn how to do the stuff that it's like the certification course, and it's no shade at all. It's amazing that they have it. A lot of it is just like, you know, introducing to the concept of like what is an RTPC, which is real-time parameter control, for example, which is to say like if the character walks on grass versus concrete, a real-time parameter control will make a switch that like, okay, now we have to play the concrete steps noise versus the grass. So like these little concepts that it introduces you to it's very kind of, it goes through it quick. And in order to really get a hold on like, I can now go from creating the sounds to getting them in the game, like you really just have to fumble around with a project that, you know, doesn't have sound yet. Which they also provide. There's a lot of the free ones of those too, provided by the people at fmod. wWise, I think I want to say there's a website. I don't know if you know the game Celeste.
Yeah.
So they took that. There's a tutorial somewhere on, if you have the game, you can go sort of through this backdoor into the files of the game, make a copy of it, and then basically like redesign the sound of the game.
Wow.
Which is something that I toyed with doing, but then I started doing some other projects, and you know, it fell by the wayside. But I guess the real education that you are going to get is not from necessarily the hand holding like multiple choice question thing. It's more it's more like going in and actually doing it. So like the wWise Adventure game, I think is what it's called. It was a Unity wWise thing that they used in the course. When I was done with the course, I was like, I could take this exam. I could spend this much money to take the exam and get the little badge or whatever on my LinkedIn, or I could go in and like redesign, like take sounds out and then re-put sounds in. Now, even in doing that wasn't like, I wasn't really learning wWise. I was just more learning where this sound lived in wWise, and then like swapping it out for my sound, and then like, you know, there's something to be said for that too, because you're actually seeing your sounds in context, like as you're moving around, and like does this work in this environment and all that kind of stuff. But so there's no one answer, I guess, but just try it, see what you like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
What about GitHub? What role does that play in the journey of a sound designer and an audio team member on a dev team?
Sure. Well, so I did an internship at Digital Scorpion Interactive, which is a company that's entirely remote, and we did. Basically, we had an audio. It's set up like a lot of other software companies, which is to say, we had like, you know, well, not even software, like game studios. So we had like narrative art, level design, audio, etc. We're all completely remote, so we would have like, you know, an audio meeting on Monday and then an all hands meeting on Friday, and etc. Basically the workflow for audio was at the beginning, and this will lead into, I remember there was another question about like the technical audio sound design thing. The way it was set up at the beginning was we would make the sound in whatever DAW we wanted. That's the other thing, actually, is that a lot of times, like, just choose a DAW. Like, if you say, like, used Nuendo forever and you want to get into game audio, keep using that. You know, it's not like a lot of stuff is just like deliverables. Like you're just like handing them a WAV file or an MP3, usually a WAV file, and that will come from, you know, whatever program you want, like as long as it works for you. But yeah, as far as like a getting started thing, Reaper's good. You'll have to edit that and put it at the front. But so basically how it worked was we went from DAW to middleware, in our case fmod. So we would make the sound, we would make the behavior for the sound, and then get it into the game engine. And then from there, we would push our changes to GitHub, meaning it's basically like if you think about Dropbox, like a Git repository. I'm trying to think of another one besides GitHub. I'm blanking, but there's lots of other programs that do this. It's basically like you're delivering your copy of the game that you just worked on, and GitHub is whoever we're passing the work into is going through and approving changes and making sure there's no conflicts, which is a lot of it is like handled by GitHub. But so basically it's a way of people working remotely on something. Like it's a way for a lot of people to work on one large project in a way that's not going to like break the game every time someone hits save, right? That's the essential. It boils down to that, I would say.
I love that. So it's kind of like the brain of the version of the build, basically.
Sure, yeah.
It absorbs and manages. And
exactly, yeah. Yeah.
So then, yeah, we were talking on our pre-call kind of like where does the role of a technical sound designer interact with a composer? How much does a composer need to feel comfortable with the implementation of the sound? So I believe you've worked with a technical sound designer. So maybe tell us a little bit about how the difference in your role and the difference in their role.
Yeah. So like I was saying, like at the beginning of that internship, the way it worked was we did that path from DAW middleware right into Unity. Toward like we were shifting around, the size of our department grew a little bit, and we were deciding basically how to dole out work. And basically we decided on, there was a couple people that were like, you know what, I'm okay with just doing technical sound design roles, meaning the stuff that everything that comes after middleware. So we would make the sound, we would make the behavior of the sound, but then actually getting it into the game and making it fire correctly and tweaking it to where it worked with the scripts and all that stuff. That was all technical sound design, as well as like sort of like the overall architecture of say like we had, for example, an endless mode in one of the games, and we had to figure out how we were handling the music, because the way I had written all the music was like chapter 1 through 4, 5 levels per chapter, and then it had this specific behavior where it would like play a layer and then play another layer on top of that, and then subtract the layer and add a different layer and then play both layers, and then so there's all this variety. But that didn't work. If it's an endless mode, I don't want them to hear the same ones over and over and over. I wanted to arrange all of the layers for all 4 chapters in like a continuous, like longer. It ended up being like a 9-minute loop or something, but that's all technical sound design roles. Is like figuring that stuff out. Now I helped with that part of it just because a lot of this work is highly collaborative, which I love about it, because if I'm going, I need a 2-minute loop. I was tasked with deciding how long it should be and like when should we have new music, like certain plot points in the story, the sort of overarching story. It was like, if what's happening in the game is like involves defending this like keep thing from bandits, it should sound like that. And what does that mean? And then that's where you go into scoring and all that stuff. But knowing how long that needs to be, like how often will the player hear, how long does it take them to beat a level? Like that's the other thing. I remember learning that early on of like, having like writing like 3 minutes of music and the level was like 30 seconds or something. And it was like, what do I do with all this music? But yeah, so like it's talking to people, it's figuring out a plan together. But yeah, so like sound is our role. Like I was the only one making music on that particular game. And then it was like the sound designers who were crafting like what things sound like based on visuals. They were lining up like, so if a character goes like that, like the sound needs to make sense with the timing of what they're doing. So they would send in video clips with their sound underneath, and then we would approve it and then either send it back or put it in fmod and send it to the technical sound designers. And then, yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is all very, very interesting because it sounds like as a composer, you have to have a fair amount of bandwidth because you're building the plane in the air from a sound implementation, but then you may need to go back into the den and come up with good music. That's a lot of pressure to be like, here's this sound, but then, oh wait, we need more music. Hold on, let me go find the muse and make something that is representative of the game, representative of my style. You mentioned that by doing things kind of bespoke and by hand and, making the sounds that you're bringing a value of originality. How do you view your portfolio as a composer and a sound designer? Is it that, are you going for that if someone plays a game that they go, oh, this sounds like Michael Spicer? Or are you going for, ooh, who did this? And then being surprised because maybe they know your previous work and it's totally different. Like, is there one lane you prefer to the other, or maybe a third lane? Where does your originality kind of focus its attention?
Sure. I think the project takes precedent over any personal thing, right? Like, so, I thought of the example as you were talking of like, the artists on the game where they would all like if you've noticed like an example would be like the Wii people, the Nintendo Wii, they have like a very specific look where you can like make your little avatar or whatever, but they have like very specific dimensions of their head and like they move a certain way. All of the artists, like then there was a whole team of artists, they all had to make those. There's different people making art that looked the same, so they have like these like parameters that they have to work within, and I think the same goes for audio. You're trying to match both the quality and the aesthetic of the visuals, and you're taking into account narrative and story and all that stuff. I think that I think the thing like, oh, this is a Michael Spicer game. I would love that, of course. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think that just kind of emerges anyway because of like how I write music and the choices I've made are just, that's part of my identity. I think anybody will just have that whether they want to or not. Like you're never going to sound like anybody but yourself. Like you're a musician, so like transcribing people, for example, Sonny Stitt, there's a lot of things that he played that sounded a lot like Charlie Parker, but you could tell it's Stitt if you know both players well enough. There's certain tells that it's like you're always going to sound like yourself, Totally. So the same goes, I think, like working on a project, especially with a team, is just a lot of it. A big, huge part of, especially music, is research, and just knowing who to talk to go. So this boss, how much does he weigh? What are his shoes made out of? And those seem like weird things, but from a sound design perspective, it's like when he steps, is it a big or is it like, not that, right? And like, is he wearing leather or iron or whatever? And just collaborating, gathering information, and then taking that and translating it into something that makes sense audio-wise. Specifically like lining it up with animations, yes, but also like would it make sense for me to write music that has like an African shaker and a gourd drum and a panpipe for this like ancient grove chapter of the game? And so like those are little choices that we're making to complement the aesthetic that already exists in the game. And I think that's should be the main focus of anyone, you know, worth their salt, like really trying to make a project succeed, is like play to the identity that's already there and not so much your own artistic needs or ego, I suppose.
Totally. So when you get brought onto a project, how much time do you have to absorb that inspiration, to find the sound, to find the heart of the music and the heart of the sound and audio design? How much of that prep and research do you get? Like
before I even start like writing kind of thing?
Yeah, like, is there a window of like, hey, I'm going to submit files in a month, and you just absorb, or do you just like day one, like, okay, let's just see what comes out, and then iterate, you know?
I think it's a little bit of a combination, but it's more like I'm the person that, like, I sometimes am afraid that I'm bothering people because I do just constantly, like, if I'm not sure of something, I'm not going to, like, well, I will say, I was going to say, like, I'm not going to guess, but there's certain things that's like, well, that is my choice, and then I know that's my responsibility to decide, to make that decision. But a lot of times it is just like, you know, I want to gather as much information as possible. Luckily, like a lot of stuff that I worked on has really extensive design documents where they talk about like if certain characters have profiles of like their whole backstory, or, you know, or an area of the game will be like this, it's this kind of atmosphere. It's, you know, and if the game is far enough that it has visuals, like you can gain a whole lot just from just seeing something, how big the space is, what's the weather, how many people are there, is it windy, is there people arguing in an apartment over here, you know, and all these things. Like there was so to answer your question, it's not like there's a period of like I'm gonna just do this and now I'm gonna go on to the next thing. It's all kind of wrapped up in like very, very iterative, sending something, and if it's not even like that's bad, I don't like it, do a different one. It's more like, can it be this? And that's like, and they don't really know how to say it in audio terms necessarily, but I'll go, I think I know what you mean, and then I'll try it and they'll go, oh yeah, that, you know. Like they don't need to know. Like there was a game that I was doing where I had to make an asset that was people arguing just about what it doesn't matter, because you're kind of like not hearing them. You're watching hear a TV playing and people arguing and stuff. And that involved me just literally recording me saying nonsense, and then like I can't remember if I recorded my wife on the, like, just recorded like you want to hear two voices kind of thing. It's just like bare minimum, like, and to do that is actually really hard without just like writing a fake argument, you know, because like there's cadences and like humans, you don't want there to be any tells of like this is a fake conversation or whatever. But like I knew that in order to make it sound like it was muffled through a wall, you know, you put a high pass filter on it, you put a low pass filter on it, and you know, run it through whatever, you EQ it in a way that makes it sound like it's coming through a wall, right? So yeah, those things, I'm like, that I know those are my decisions to make, and I'll have, the more experience I get, it's like I know how to talk to clients like a lot better than I did when I started doing this. So there's lots and lots of collaboration, iteration, and checking in and dialing things in. Like this could be a little less high end or whatever. And that just happens through the whole cycle of me delivering audio, I would say.
Yeah. So then, when it comes to then the stage that you're at now, where you're creating a soundtrack, is it on you to mix and master and do all of that yourself? And then, if so, because I've had one experience where I was playing an indie game that I love the soundtrack of, and I always felt like it had a lot of weight and impact when I was playing it. And then when I downloaded the soundtrack from iTunes and like analyzed it, it was really quiet, which I'm fine with. I actually prefer quiet masters.
Sure.
But I was like, this is super bold. Was this intentional, or was this like essentially not mastered? And that made me ask myself so many questions, because I was like, why does the game sound so impactful and punchy, but the soundtrack, same music, is really, really quiet when it gets, you know, bounced out for digital distribution? So how much of that is on you? How much of the levels is at the stage that you're at now? Are your levels and you know, compression and limiting settings going to be totally different than what we hear in the game?
More or less, because there's like that nonlinearity, if that's a term, of games. It's like, yeah, like there's like you're mixing in fmod for example, like when you're like we put our sound in the game, we know it's hooked up right, we've tested it, now let's go and like make sure it sounds right in the game. Well, there's a mixing stage to that, and there's like, you know, there's actually literally a mixing stage at the very end of the production cycle, but like you're kind of spot mixing as you go. It might be that like they, at a certain level, like there's a whole bunch of other sounds that are happening. So footsteps are like, let's just axe footsteps at that point, or whatever. Or there's too much happening sound effect wise, so we actually will just mute the music there. Or the music needs to be this low, or maybe just this layer versus all the dialogue that's happening, whatever. There's just different like there's different requirements when sounds and music are firing in game. Now, I don't know about necessarily the impact you're talking about. Like everything's being mixed through fmod when you're hearing it in the game. So like they could have, in whatever game that is, have had that going through a bus that just has a boosted EQ on the low end or something. Like literally it could be something technical like that, because, you know, if you listen to like AAA sound design, if you like anybody could go and look up like Marshall McGee. He's a great example of a AAA sound designer that makes sounds that are like, especially nowadays, they're just so, there's a lot of like mid-low stuff. It's very punchy. Has weight. It has like texture. It's like sound is like, has taken off in the last like 10 years, like crazy. And there's things that people are doing in games that they're mimicking in movies and stuff now. But what was my point in saying that?
Well, you were explaining how, you know, low mids, punchy dynamics are becoming more popular. Yeah.
So in translating what's happening in the game into a soundtrack, you know, if I don't know if you've produced albums, but like if you are exporting something to Spotify, like, you know that like -14 LUFS output is like a standard. Like there's different standards of like loudness and levels and whatever when you're uploading to different platforms. So, and I think you would probably have like I know that for me, I'm doing all my own mixing and stuff. I have a final kind of mastering thing happening at the record label that I'm releasing the OST through. And that's a lot of that is just like bouncing, like getting critique and like kind of fixing it myself. Like it's sort of a smaller operation, but like I think that you would hear it different hear a mix different in fmod or something because of the requirements of the game, because it's running through different things. And then when you're exporting or when you're publishing an album of that music, you're completely going through a different channels and like doing it in a more traditional way, I guess.
Yeah. So say like theoretically, if you love listening to sound design in game, does that mean, say you're playing Hades and then you go to something like Stardew Valley or something like Darkest Dungeon or Dredge or Dave the Diver, is there somewhere in their fmod chain, maybe Dave the Diver's running through a UA plugin, Shadow Hills, or maybe Dredge is running through an L1 waves limiter? Like, is
Sure.
everyone choosing different, like, is all these games running through third-party plugins in fmod's bus? Or is there a fmod native limiter or native kind of plugin that your chance to color the sound is pre that, and then it all kind of runs through the same algorithm? Or is it like everyone's inserting their own preferred compressors and limiters and
The second
multiband
one,
and all that?
the prefer, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, like, because it's any number of things can happen before you even get into fmod. Like whatever you're exporting from your DAW, you know, like whatever you're baking into that file that you're delivering to fmod will affect what, you know, and then whoever's, and this is all, that's going to be more technical sound design level stuff, which is like, you know, the actual architecture of how the audio functions. You know, they're going to put their own personal touch on it. Like, it's just like handing it off to a mixer, right? They know, okay, this needs more weight because that other thing has this much weight, and that's smaller than this other thing, so that needs to be here. You know, and it's stuff that's how they're going to make that decision versus like, I prefer more low end or something. You know, it's they're going to be more focused on like making it work in the game. Yeah.
That's really, really interesting. I would love to be able to see what those final chains look like for these games that we've all heard. You know, like, well, just to
a ton of
boil it.
They do like GDC talks. Like a lot of these people will do like if you've ever heard of postmortems, they'll talk about the audio of Spider-Man 2 or whatever, and they'll talk about how they designed. Like that was literally one that it was from GDC last year. They were talking about like how they designed the ambient system. So like your Spider-Man and you'll like swing down by some people and then back up and you'll hear people. And so like they're like, how do we we're not going to have like an emitter coming out of every single like person walking, because that would be too much like for what you want. So they had like clumps, like if there was clumps of people, I think it depended on how many people were grouped together, and if it was like exceeded a certain limit, then it was like a different sound, like a slightly larger sounding crowd versus like, you know, 4 or 5 people. I could be getting all of this wrong, but but that's the stuff that it's a lot of this is just open book stuff. Like you give like, you know, the fmod. There's the guys who did Celeste, Power Up Audio. They have a whole Twitch channel dedicated to helping people get sound design reels together, which I've done twice now. And basically you submit your website and your portfolio, and they just absolutely tear it to shreds and tell you what's wrong with it, and they don't hold back.
That's awesome.
And so that kind of thing, it's like there's game audio specifically, there's such a, it's just people will just reach out to people and ask them stuff, and I've done it too, because like I've been starting doing this, and I've reached out to people and been given just paragraphs, books of like, here's what you should do, here's what you don't have, and here's what you need, kind of thing. And likewise, like people will reach out to me on like LinkedIn or whatever, and I'll absolutely, hey, if you have a reel, send it to me, because like I just did one last month, I think, where it was just I recorded a video of me talking about what was going on, and like as I watched it, I did a screen recording, because that's exactly what this guy Daniel Kim at Riot Games, a sound designer for like League of Legends, he did that for me. I sent him a reel, and he recorded a video of him talking, and like it was just stuff that like he kind of regular everyday stuff, but like the way he was talking about it, it was just, I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense, and like it got me really excited and like inspired, and it was great. So it's I think that game audio in general is just a really good open book community, you know, very approachable. So, yeah.
Sweet. Well, where can people follow along on your journey if they want to connect with you or check out your videos that you post and all of that?
Sort of, I've been more focusing on LinkedIn lately just because of job hunt stuff, but that's sort of become my Facebook. I've kind of let my other social media branches wither a little bit, but I'm hoping to kind of like get more into Twitter, maybe a little more, because Twitter has a really good game audio community. But yeah, so LinkedIn, I'm just Michael Spicer. Everything else is basically Spicer Audio. So I think I'm Spicer Audio on Instagram, Spicer Audio on Twitter. There's probably other ones. Oh, my website, spiceraudio.com. That's sort of my portfolio thing. But yeah, LinkedIn is where I'm the most active. And yeah, like this week I did some posts about the OST that I'm doing for Tales of Valoris. And so yeah, that's been fun because it's like I'll try to give you something useful while also, hey, I know how to do this, you know. So
totally.
Yeah.
Rad. Well, thank you for sharing all of this knowledge. This is incredibly valuable and incredibly useful.
Thanks,
so yeah, I'm excited to follow along on the journey, and I'm sure our audience will appreciate all of this knowledge. And yeah, thank you again for chatting and hanging out.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. It really is a pleasure.
And to our audience watching, thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you guys next time. Later. Bye.